Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are taking on, well, one of the most beloved novels ever written, I think it's fair to say.
Absolutely. But maybe also one of the most frequently simplified.
Exactly. We're diving deep into Jane Austen's 1813 masterpiece, Pride and Prejudice. We'll be looking closely at excerpts, character dynamics, and, crucially, the social mechanics that drive everything.
Right. Because it survived over 2 centuries for a reason. On the surface, yes, it's maybe the template for the modern rom-com. But underneath that, it's this incredibly sharp, sometimes even cynical look at economic survival, social class, and the really difficult process of self-correction, of realizing you were wrong.
So our mission today is kind of to peel back that romantic comedy layer.
Yeah, to trace how money, manners, and the, frankly, rigid structure of early 19th century England dictate pretty much every choice, every character flaw, and ultimately every triumph of the book.
Okay, before we jump right into the text itself, maybe just a little stage setting.
Good idea.
Jane Austen wrote the first version, First Impressions, way back between 1796 and 1797. Didn't get published until 1813, though.
Right, and the setting is key. We're talking about the landed gentry in Hertfordshire. It's a world where a woman's entire life, her comfort, her security, her social standing, it all hinges almost entirely on who she marries.
It really does. And the story centers on the Bennet family, Mr. and Mrs. Bennet and their 5 daughters, Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia.
And the core problem is laid out right away. The Bennet girls have to marry well. Why? Because the family estate, Longbourn, it doesn't go to them when Mr. Bennet dies.
No, it's entailed, meaning it has to pass to the closest male relative who happens to be a distant cousin.
Which leaves Mrs. Bennet and any unmarried daughters, potentially, well, destitute is maybe too strong, but certainly in a very precarious financial position.
That economic pressure, that ticking clock, it really is the engine driving the whole plot. Okay, let's dive in and unpack how Austen establishes these stakes right from the get-go. #Hagbotry introduction and establishing the stakes.
Well, if she doesn't waste any time. The novel's focus is basically declared in that incredibly famous first sentence. You know the one.
Oh, yeah. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. It's iconic.
It is, but notice the phrasing. It's not about romance, is it? It's presented like an economic principle, almost a law of social physics.
Right. It defines the wealthy single man not as, a person looking for love, but as potential property, the rightful property, Austen says, of some one or other of their daughters.
Exactly, and that tells you everything you need to know about Mrs. Bennet. Her entire purpose, her whole life's work, is basically defined by this social contract. She's a professional matchmaker, but for her own kids.
And we see this immediately, don't we? The Bennet household comes alive through this lens of marital obsession. Mrs. Bennet is practically vibrating with excitement because Netherfield Park, this big house nearby, has finally been rented.
And it's rented by a wealthy, single man, Mr. Bingley. So her first line is basically the sound of opportunity knocking, mixed with anxiety. My dear Mr. Bennet, have you heard that Netherfield Park is let at last?
Accompanied, of course, by her perpetually poor nerves.
Always the poor nerves.
But what's so great is how her, hysteria is immediately contrasted with Mr. Bennet's attitude. He's so detached, almost cruelly sarcastic sometimes.
Yeah, he uses wit as a shield, doesn't he? He clearly prefers Elizabeth, little Lizzie, because she has something more of quickness than her sisters.
He sees her as an intellectual equal, maybe, or at least someone who gets his jokes.
I think so. His wit is his escape hatch from his wife's relentless focus. When Mrs. Bennet insists Lizzie's no better than the others, calls them all silly and ignorant.
He sort of agrees, but then singles Lizzie out again.
Right, and because Elizabeth can match his dry humor, she earns his respect, which actually becomes really important later. It's her defense against her mother's, let's say, less subtle strategies.
But there's a definite downside to his detachment, isn't there? His wit is entertaining for the reader, but it also means he's profoundly negligent as a parent.
Oh, absolutely. He doesn't manage his younger daughter's behavior at all. He finds their silliness amusing, maybe, but he doesn't step in. And that refusal to engage, especially with the younger girls, it leads directly to disaster later on. He's a clever observer, but, yeah, pretty terrible father in many ways.
So speaking of the daughters, we get that quick rundown early on. Jane, the eldest, she's the beauty. Everyone agrees. Even Mr. Bennet calls her handsome.
The standard package, almost. Admired by all.
Then Elizabeth, or Lizzie, the favorite, defined by her quickness, her lively mind.
And then there are the others who kind of set up the social hazards. Mary, get to marry,
Oh, Mary.
and Catherine, or Kitty, and Lydia, the younger two. They're described as having fairly vacant minds. Their main interests seem to be bonnets and officers,
Constantly running off to Meryton, the local town.
because that's where the militia regiment is stationed. They get their news and happiness from the soldiers. And that obsession with uniforms, it's the first real hint of their lack of, well, propriety. And judgment, #2. The arrival at Meriden and the first impressions, chapters 2 to 4.
Okay, so the economic clock is ticking. Netherfield is let. The first crucial step for Mrs. Bennet's plan is for Mr. Bennet to make the formal social call on Mr. Bingley. You couldn't just show up back then.
Right, the gentleman of the house had to make the first move, introduce the family, essentially.
But Mr. Bennet, being Mr. Bennet, decides to torture his wife a bit first.
Yeah, chapter 2 is pure Mr. Bennet. We see his quiet, almost secretive sense of humor, and his wife's completely over-the-top reaction. He tells her repeatedly he won't go visit Bingley.
Even though he fully intends to.
Exactly. He always intended to visit him. He only reveals he's already done it after the fact, clearly enjoying the chaos it causes.
Mrs. Bennet has to apologize for being angry, blame her poor nerves again. It's quite the performance.
It is, and it's a little window into just how dysfunctional the communication in that house is, which, again, has huge consequences down the line. If they can't talk straight about a simple visit, how are they going to handle, actual crises?
Good point. But that little domestic drama fades pretty quickly because the next big event is the Meryton Assembly in Chapter 3, the local ball.
And this is it. The moment where those crucial first impressions are formed, the whole conflict of the novel basically gets ignited here.
The contrast couldn't be clearer, could it? Mr. Bingley arrives, and he's an instant hit. Universally admired.
He's everything they want him to be. He's lively, he's charming, he's not reserved, he dances every dance, which was important.
And crucially, he singles out Jane Bennet. Dances with her twice. That's significant.
Huge signal. Mrs. Bennet must have been ecstatic. He's judged immediately as wonderfully handsome, extremely agreeable, and most importantly, he seems approachable. He's playing the social game correctly.
And then there's Mr. Darcy.
Then there's Darcy. The mood just shifts, doesn't it? He's even wealthier than Bingley. His estate, Pemberley, is apparently magnificent, far grander than Netherfield.
But his behavior is the polar opposite. He only dances twice, once with Bingley's sister, Mrs. Hurst, and once with the other sister, Miss Bingley. He refuses introductions to other ladies.
Spends most of the evening just walking about the room, looking displeased.
And the local society's verdict is immediate and harsh.
Unanimous. He is the proudest, most disagreeable man in the world. And it's worth pausing on why. His behavior is just so outside the expected norms for a wealthy newcomer. They expect eagerness, or at least politeness.
His reserve isn't seen as shyness. It's interpreted as deliberate contempt, aggressive aloofness.
Exactly. Which leads directly to that pivotal moment, the slight against Elizabeth that really anchors the prejudice part of the title.
So William Lucas tries to get Darcy to dance with Elizabeth.
And Darcy just shuts it down with that absolutely brutal line. She is tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me. And it gets worse. And I am in no humor at present to give consequence to young ladies who are slighted by other men.
Wow. So he's not just saying she's not attractive enough for him, he's implying she's a reject, and dancing with her would be like doing her a favor, giving her consequence.
It's a double insult. Deeply condescending, and Elizabeth's reaction is key. She's hurt, obviously, but her pride and her wit kick in immediately. She resolves to detest the man.
Finds material for ridicule, even.
Right. But that single public insult, it colors her perception of everything he does from that point on. It's the perfect seed for prejudice. One sharp injury that makes it easy to believe the worst about him later.
So after the ball, in Chapter 4, we get the sisters debriefing, basically. Jane, when she's alone with Elizabeth, drops her caution about Bingley and admits she really admires him. She's genuinely taken.
Smitten. And we also get Elizabeth's take on the rest of the Bingley party, specifically the sisters, Miss Bingley and Mrs. Hurst.
She's not impressed, calls them very fine ladies, but notes their behavior at the assembly had not been calculated to please. Basically, they were snobs.
Yeah, their manners were all about reinforcing their own status within their London circle, not about being friendly to the Hertfordshire locals. You see their ambition straight away.
We also get the financial details. Bingley inherited nearly £100,000. That's a huge fortune.
Massive. But he's got this easiness of temper. He's happy just renting Netherfield.
His sisters, though, they're pushing him to buy a proper estate. They want to solidify the family's social standing. especially Mrs. Hurst, who apparently married someone with more fashion than actual money.
Right. They need Bingley to marry well-meaning someone with connections, status, maybe even more money, not just a pretty girl from the country with questionable relatives.
And Darcy's private conversation with Bingley afterwards just cements his own reputation for pride. Bingley's raving about Jane, calls her an angel.
And Darcy's response, he admits she's pretty, but complains she smiled too much.
Seriously, smile too much.
Apparently. And he dismisses the entire assembly as a collection of people in whom there was little beauty and no fashion. It reinforces his contempt for anyone outside his own elite circle. His pride isn't just passive, it's an active judgment filter. #tag3, Society, Strategy, and Sickness. Chapter 6 to 9.
Okay, moving into chapter 6, we start to see this really interesting tension emerge. It's Elizabeth's kind of youthful idealism about romance versus her friend Charlotte Lucas's much more pragmatic approach.
And, maybe surprisingly, we also see Darcy starting to pay attention to Elizabeth, despite his earlier comments.
Yeah, he's observed listening to her conversations. He seems intrigued by her energy, her refusal to just blend in. Remember when Sir William tries again to get them to dance and Elizabeth refuses him this time?
Darcy is struck with the action. Her defiance, her refusal to play the expected social game, seems to fascinate him. Perhaps because it's so different from the women he usually encounters.
But the real core of this section, I think, is that conversation between Charlotte and Elizabeth about Jane and Bingley.
Oh, it's devastatingly brilliant social commentary. Charlotte basically tells Elizabeth that Jane needs to lock Bingley down now. Her advice is, when she is secure of him, there will be more leisure for falling in love as much as she chooses.
Get the contract signed, then worry about the feelings.
Exactly. Its marriage is an economic transaction first, romance second, or maybe third. It's cynical, but for Charlotte, it's pure pragmatism.
Elizabeth, who's younger, prettier, her father's favorite, she's horrified. She believes Jane is acting genuinely, not acting by design, and that love has to come first.
But Charlotte is 27. In that era, that's practically on the shelf. She doesn't have much money. She knows the clock is ticking for her. Marriage isn't about ideals. It's the pleasantest preservative from want. It's survival.
And this difference in perspective sets up their diverging paths later, doesn't it?
Completely. It's a crucial contrast. We also get a little insight into Mary Bennet here.
Ah, Mary, the only plain one in the family.
Right. And she tries so hard to compensate by acquiring knowledge and accomplishments. She practices the piano diligently.
But it doesn't quite work, does it? Her performance is described as technically correct, but pedantic, laborious, lacking genius nor taste.
It's effort without charm. Whereas Elizabeth, who apparently plays less well, does it with more ease and is more pleasing to listen to. Mary represents another kind of survival strategy intellectualism, but it fails socially because it's too forced, too try-hard.
Okay, Chapter 7 really hammers home the financial stakes, the reason behind Mrs. Bennet's desperation, and maybe even Charlotte's pragmatism.
Yeah, we got the specifics. We knew about the entailment, but here Austen lays out the numbers. Mr. Bennet's estate brings in £2,000 a year. Sounds okay, but it dies with him.
And Mrs. Bennet only brought £4,000 to the marriage, which divided 5 ways amongst the daughters.
Leaves them with virtually nothing, about £800 each. The interest on that would be maybe £40 a year. It's not enough to live on respectably. They need to marry, and marry someone with money. They face genuine social and financial ruin otherwise.
Which explains, if not excuses, Mrs. Bennet's next big move, her most audacious strategy yet.
The sick Jane plot. It's brilliant, in a ruthless kind of way. Jane gets invited to Netherfield to dine with the Bingley sisters. The men are out.
So Mrs. Bennet deliberately sends Jane on horseback, knowing rain is forecast.
Hoping she'll get caught, get soaked, get sick, and have to stay at Netherfield. Making her Bingley's problem, essentially. An object of concern and care.
It's pure manipulation, calculated.
And it works. Jane gets genuinely ill from the wedding. It's a terrible thing to do to your daughter, but it's driven by this absolute terror of future poverty.
Elizabeth's reaction then highlights a different Bennet trait: independence, maybe. Chapter 8. She's so worried about Jane, she decides to walk the 3 miles to Netherfield.
Across muddy fields, she arrives with weary ankles, dirty stockings, and a face glowing with the warmth of exercise, all out of sisterly love.
Which naturally provides ammunition for the Netherfield snobs. Miss Bingley and Darcy are appalled by this breach of decorum.
Miss Bingley calls it an abominable sort of conceited independence, a most country town indifference to decorum. Ladies weren't supposed to tramp through the mud like that.
Yeah.
It shows a lack of refinement.
Bingley, bless him, defends her, says it shows affection for her sister, which is very pleasing.
But Darcy immediately uses it as a springboard for a sharp class critique. He's asked if her little adventure has lessened his admiration of her fine eyes.
And he basically says, fine eyes or not, it doesn't matter how agreeable the Bennet sisters are individually.
If they have uncles enough to fill all Cheapside, it would very materially lessen their chance of marrying men of any consideration.
Okay, that Cheapside comment is loaded. Explain that.
Cheapside was the heart of commercial London. Trade, business. Mrs. Bennet's brother, Mr. Gardiner, who turns out to be one of the most sensible people in the book, is in trade there.
So Darcy's not just being a snob about muddy stockings. He's expressing the aristocracy's deep-seated anxiety about being connected, even indirectly, to commerce, to new money or working money.
Exactly. He fears contamination by association. He's worried about Bingley marrying into a family with these vulgar connections in trade. It could damage Bingley's own social standing. It's about protecting the boundaries of his class.
Later that evening, Elizabeth opts to read a book instead of playing cards, which prompts Miss Bingley to snark about her being a great reader who despises cards.
Elizabeth pushes back. I am not a great reader, and I have pleasure in many things, including looking after Jane. She refuses to be neatly categorized.
And that leads straight into that famous debate about the accomplished woman.
Which is really Darcy setting an impossibly high bar for what constitutes an acceptable woman of his class. It's not just about playing the piano or speaking French.
No, she needs extensive knowledge of music, singing, drawing, dancing, modern languages. And beyond all that, a certain something in her air and manner of walking, the tone of her voice, and extensive reading.
It's a ridiculous list. Probably designed so he can find fault with pretty much anyone.
And Elizabeth just skewers it. I am no longer surprised at your knowing only 6 accomplished women. I rather wonder now at your knowing ANY.
Boom. Again, her wit just cuts through the pretension. It levels the playing field instantly. And you can see how this would both attract and potentially alarm Darcy. She's not playing by the rules.
Miss Bingley tries to twist it, suggesting Elizabeth is trying to impress men by putting down other women.
But Darcy actually defends Elizabeth, in a way. He says, whatever bears affinity to cunning is despicable. He seems to recognize her critique as genuine, not manipulative. He's observing her closely now.
Chapter 9 brings Mrs. Bennet to Netherfield to check on Jane. And naturally, she continues to be utterly tactless.
Her main concern seems to be that Jane isn't too ill, because she doesn't want her leaving Netherfield just yet.
And she tries to score points against Darcy by defending country manners, saying there's quite as much of that going on in the country as in town, whatever that is. Gossip, flirting.
Who knows? Darcy just turns silently away. He can't even engage with that level of insecurity and, well, vulgarity.
Then we get that little debate about poetry. Darcy says it's the food of love. Very romantic ideal.
And Elizabeth, still cynical about how easily men's affections fade, counters that if the love is only slight, thin, then one good sonnet will starve it entirely away.
It's a great metaphor for their whole dynamic, isn't it? He believes in grand pronouncements, status, permanence. She believes in scrutiny, testing the foundations, recognizing fragility.
Perfectly put. And the chapter ends with Lydia brazenly reminding Bingley about his promise to hold the ball at Netherfield, showing off her high animal spirits and natural self-consequence.
And Bingley, good-natured as ever, readily agrees to have the ball as soon as Jane is fully recovered, setting the stage for the next major social event. #tag for social clashes and the dawn of affection. Chapters 10 to 12. So Jane's getting better, but the social tension at Netherfield is actually ramping up, mostly thanks to Miss Bingley.
Oh, Caroline Bingley is getting desperate in Chapter 10. She's trying everything to get Darcy's attention, and it's just not working.
Complimenting his handwriting.
How fast he writes, the length of his letters to his sister. Even praising his sister Georgiana's harp playing.
And Darcy meets it all with perfect unconcern. It's almost painful to read. Her flattery is so obvious, so targeted, it just bounces right off him.
In Chapter 11, she tries a different tactic. Forced intimacy. She urges Elizabeth to walk around the room with her, probably hoping to break Darcy's concentration on his book.
Which it does. He looks up, gets drawn in, and eventually joins their walk. He can't resist being near Elizabeth, it seems.
And this leads to that brilliant sparring match about their own flaws. Elizabeth playfully accuses Darcy of having no faults, since he seems immune to ridicule.
He parries, saying only fools make virtues into vices through jest, which leads them to discussing pride and vanity.
And Darcy makes that famous, revealing distinction. Vanity, he says, is a weakness caring what others think. But pride, where there is a real superiority of mind, pride will always under good regulation.
He genuinely believes his pride is justified because he believes he is superior.
Exactly. And Elizabeth sees this clearly. She turns away to hide a smile, thinking he has no defect. He owns it himself without disguise. His arrogance is profound, but it's consistent. He's not pretending.
And right after this exchange, Austen gives us a glimpse inside Darcy's head. This is crucial.
Yes. The proximity, the intellectual challenge, the fact that she's completely unimpressed by his wealth or status, it's breaking through his defenses. Austen writes that Darcy begins to feel the danger of paying Elizabeth too much attention.
He's falling for her, against his better judgment. His attraction is starting to override his deeply ingrained class prejudice. It's the first real crack in his armor.
A huge internal shift. But the Netherfield stay has to end. Chapter 12. And Mrs. Bennet tries one last maneuver.
Refuses to send the carriage to pick Jane and Elizabeth up, hoping to stretch their stay even longer, still playing the game.
It's just compounding the awkwardness, the sense of imposition. Elizabeth, who values propriety far more than her mother does, is impatient to get home.
She insists on borrowing Bingley's carriage, asserting her independence one last time.
And they finally leave. Dingley promises that ball will happen soon. A promise that external forces are about to make very complicated. Hashtag tag V, Mr. Collins' entailment, and the Meryton intrigue. Chapters 13-16.
Okay, so the focus shifts dramatically now. We move from the eligible bachelor, Bingley, who might save the Bennet fortunes,
To the man who represents the threat to their security, Mr. Collins, the heir.
His arrival in Chapter 13 is announced by a letter, preceded by Mrs. Bennet complaining again about the entailment, the hardest thing in the world.
And the letter itself is a masterpiece of awful writing. It perfectly captures Collins' character before we even meet him. It's pompous, full of false humility, and ridiculously formal.
He apologizes for being the one who will inherit their home, for injuring your amiable daughters.
And then immediately hints at his solution. He'll make amends by marrying one of them. It's so unsubtle. Restitution through marriage.
Mr. Bennet, of course, is delighted. He finds his cousin as absurd as he had hoped. Collins is basically a new source of entertainment for him.
And Collins does not disappoint when he arrives in Chapter 14. He immediately establishes his defining characteristic, his utter devotion to his patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh.
Everything is filtered through Lady Catherine. He praises her constantly, her affability and condescension. His whole manner has this more than usual solemnity because he's now a clergyman under her patronage. He thinks this makes him incredibly important.
He even describes Lady Catherine's daughter, Anne de Bourgh, who he hasn't met much as sickly, but of distinguished birth, and notes that compliments about her high status are always acceptable to ladies. He's learned that flattery and deference are the keys to survival in his world.
He's a total sycophant, a social parasite, really.
And Mr. Bennet zeroes in on this immediately. He asks Collins if his compliments proceed from the impulse of the moment or are the result of previous study.
Just twisting the knife, forcing Collins to admit he often prepares elegant compliments in advance, exposing the complete artificiality of his social performance.
Collins's character is further revealed when he refuses to participate in reading a novel aloud. Novels are too frivolous.
Instead, he chooses Fordyce's sermons.
Oh, Fordyce's Sermons, a notoriously dull conduct book aimed at young women, preachy and moralistic.
And he barely gets started before Lydia interrupts him, chattering about the officers and a lottery, which just confirms Collins's view that young ladies aren't interested in books of a serious stamp.
By Chapter 15, Collins has made his calculations. He initially considered Jane, the eldest and prettiest, but hearing she might soon be engaged.
He pivots immediately to Elizabeth. She's equally next to Jane in birth and beauty, so she'll do. It's completely methodical, unemotional, like choosing livestock.
And Mrs. Bennet is suddenly thrilled. The odious man who's inheriting their house is now a potential husband for Lizzie. She's already planning 2 weddings.
But this awkward family dynamic is interrupted by something much more intriguing in Chapter 16, the Meryton intrigue.
Yes. The Bennet girls, plus Collins, walk into Meryton and encounter the militia officers. And among them is a newcomer, a Mr. Wickham.
And he's immediately striking. Austen describes him as exceeding all the other officers in person, countenance, air, and walk. He's got instant charm, the kind Darcy completely lacks.
And then comes the crucial moment. Darcy and Bingley happen to ride by. There's this visible, awkward reaction between Darcy and Wickham. They both change color. Darcy looks particularly pale.
It's silent, but it screams history. Bad history. Elizabeth clocks it immediately, confirms for her that something significant happened between them.
Later that evening at their Aunt Phillips's house, Wickham gets his chance to explain, and he does so very effectively, confiding in Elizabeth.
He spins this tale. He's the son of the late Mr. Darcy's steward, basically grew up alongside the current Darcy, was his father's godson, educated with Darcy, destined for the church.
And promised a comfortable living, a guaranteed income and position for life from the Darcy family estate.
But then comes the accusation. Wickham claims the current Mr. Darcy, out of spite or jealousy or pride, refused to give him the promised living when it became vacant, just cut him off, left him impoverished.
It's a powerful story. It plays on sympathy, injustice, and Wickham's analysis of Darcy is cleverly done. He suggests Darcy's pride, usually a source of virtue for him, was overcome in this case by even stronger impulses. Malice, basically.
And Elizabeth completely buys it. Why?
Because it fits perfectly with the negative first impression she already formed at the Meryton ball. Darcy was proud and disagreeable then. This story explains why he might act so unfairly. It validates her initial prejudice.
She thinks, how strange, how abominable. She feels Darcy's pride should have made him honorable, but Wickham's story suggests a deeper flaw.
Yeah. Her dislike now feels justified. It's not just about a snub at a dance. It's about perceived moral corruption. She sees Wickham as the charming victim and Darcy as the cold-hearted villain, and she sees herself as the discerning judge who has figured it all out. Hashtag tag CG's Proposals, Deception, and Disappointment, chapters 17 to 24.
So Elizabeth is now armed with Wickham's story, and in chapter 17, she tells Jane.
And Jane's reaction is pure Jane Bennet. She's shocked, concerned, but her default setting is to think well of everyone.
She can't quite believe it, tries to find excuses. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, an accident. She finds it impossible to believe Mr. Darcy could be so unworthy of Mr. Bingley's regard. Her goodness makes her kind of naive.
It's her defining characteristic, but also her flaw. She can't see malice easily. Meanwhile, Mr. Collins makes his next move.
He asks Elizabeth for the first 2 dances at the upcoming Netherfield ball.
Which was a significant gesture, basically signaling serious romantic interest. It confirms Elizabeth's fears. She's officially his target to become the next mistress of Hunsford Parsonage, his chosen instrument of restitution.
Then comes the ball itself, and Wickham isn't there.
And Elizabeth immediately assumes it's because Darcy is present. She blames Darcy's malice for driving Wickham away, which just fuels her resentment further. She's fully invested in the victim narrative now.
So when Darcy surprises her by asking her to dance in chapter 18, she accepts, but she's ready for a fight.
Totally. She's determined to make him talk, to confront him. She even says, "It is your turn to say something now, Mr. Darcy." Puts him on the spot.
And she immediately steers the conversation towards Wickham. Doesn't name him directly at first, but talks about making hasty judgments based on first impressions.
Then gets more direct, referencing someone who has been unlucky as to lose your friendship, and in a manner which he is likely to suffer from all his life. It's a clear challenge.
And Darcy. He refuses to be drawn into public gossip about Wickham. He stays controlled, reserved, which probably just looks like guilt to Elizabeth.
And during this tense dance, Sir William Lucas wanders over, oblivious as ever.
Makes some awkward comment about how well Darcy dances, and then blurts out something about anticipating Jane and Bingley's engagement soon, and asks Darcy if he agrees.
Oh, that was probably disastrous. Sir William, this minor country gentleman, publicly linking Bingley to Jane. To Darcy, who's already worried about the Bennet family's lack of connections and propriety, this must have sounded alarm bells, confirmation that the danger was real and immediate.
Meanwhile, Jane tries her own quiet investigation. She asks Bingley about Wickham.
And Bingley defends his friend staunchly. He says he doesn't know the details, but he will vouch for the good conduct, the probity, and honor of his friend. And flatly states, Mr. Wickham is by no means a respectable young man.
Clear testimony from someone who knows Darcy well. But Elizabeth
dismisses it instantly. It's just Bingley's blind partiality for Darcy. She trusts Wickham's charm over Bingley's character witness. Her prejudice is overriding clear evidence.
And to cap off the evening's disasters, Mrs. Bennet is loudly talking to Lady Lucas about how certain she is of Jane's engagement to Bingley, within earshot of Darcy.
Mortifying for Elizabeth.
Yeah.
And likely the final nail in the coffin for Darcy. It confirms all his fears about the family's vulgarity and lack of discretion. His intervention now probably feels not just justified, but necessary.
So the very next day, chapter 19, the inevitable happens. Mr. Collins proposes to Elizabeth.
And his proposal speech is just legendary. It's an incredible piece of satire. He lays out his reasons like a business plan.
Reason 1, his duty as a clergyman to set an example of matrimony. Reason 2, he thinks it'll make him happy. Reason 3, it was specifically advised by his patroness, Lady Catherine.
And finally, his desire to compensate the Bennet family by choosing a wife from among the daughters. It's all duty, convenience, and pleasing his patroness. Nothing about Elizabeth herself.
He genuinely seems to think she should be grateful for the offer. He can't fathom she'd reject the security he represents.
So when Elizabeth rejects him firmly, he literally doesn't believe her. He assumes it's just feminine modesty, the usual practice of elegant females, to refuse a man the first time.
She has to spell it out. I am perfectly serious in my refusal. The comedy is brilliant. His complete inability to imagine a woman prioritizing personal feeling over economic security.
This leads directly to that fantastic family showdown in Chapter 20. High drama, but also high comedy. Mrs. Bennet is furious. Nobody cares for my poor nerves. She insists Elizabeth must marry Collins for the sake of the family, threatens never to see her again.
And then Mr. Bennet delivers the killer line. He calls Elizabeth in and says, "An unhappy alternative is before you, Elizabeth. From this day, you must be a stranger to one of your parents. Your mother will never see you again if you do not marry Mr. Collins, and I will never see you again if you do."
Perfect. He sides with Elizabeth, valuing her happiness over the security Collins represents. It's a rare moment of decisive action from him, and it saves Elizabeth.
It solidifies him as her ally, but that moment of relief is immediately shattered by really bad news in Chapter 21.
Yes. Jane receives a letter from Caroline Bingley. They've all left Netherfield, gone back to London for the winter. No definite plans to return.
And the letter deliberately twists the knife, praises Darcy's sister, Georgiana, hinting that Bingley is growing attached to her.
Elizabeth sees right through it. This isn't Bingley's decision. This is a scheme concocted by Miss Bingley, probably with Darcy's help, the overpowering friend. They're deliberately separating Jane and Charles.
Her prejudice against Darcy hardens into absolute certainty now. He's not just proud, he's actively cruel, willing to break her sister's heart for his own reasons.
But just as Elizabeth is reeling from this, Chapter 22 delivers another blow. A really shocking one.
Charlotte Lucas accepts Mr. Collins's proposal. The proposal Elizabeth's just vehemently rejected.
Elizabeth is stunned. Hurt, even. She sees it as unaccountable. How could her sensible friend marry someone so obviously absurd?
Charlotte's reasoning, though, is laid bare. It's brutal honesty. Collins is ridiculous, yes. Neither sensible nor agreeable. But marriage was the only honorable provision for well-educated young women of small fortune.
She's 27, plain, no prospects. Collins offers a home, stability, a respectable position. It's not romantic, but it's security. A preservative from want. She sees it as good luck, a practical solution to her precarious situation.
This really hits Elizabeth hard, doesn't it? In Chapter 24, when Jane tries to defend Charlotte's choice as prudent,
Elizabeth won't have it. She calls Collins conceited, pompous, narrow-minded, silly, and calls Charlotte's decision pure selfishness, not prudence, because Charlotte knows better intellectually.
this whole episode deepens Elizabeth's disillusionment. The more I see of the world, the more am I dissatisfied with it. She's learning that the pragmatic realities of money and society often crush idealistic notions of love and merit. Not everyone can afford to wait for a Darcy, or even reject a Collins. #tag7, Kent, Kitty, and Mr. Berg, chapters 26 to 29.
So time moves on a bit. Jane goes to London hoping to see Bingley, but gets snubbed by Caroline. Elizabeth's cynicism grows. And then there's an update on Wickham in chapter 26.
Yeah, her sensible Aunt Gardiner warns Elizabeth about him, points out he has no money, making him an imprudent match, however charming he is. Practical advice.
Elizabeth kind of agrees, promises to be careful, but still calls him the most agreeable man I ever saw. She's still susceptible to charm.
But then Wickham makes his move, not on Elizabeth, but on a Miss King.
Who has suddenly inherited £10,000.
Ah. So Wickham's agreeableness has found a more financially viable target.
Precisely. And Elizabeth's reaction is telling. She insists she's not hurt, not pained. She rationalizes it as a wise and desirable measure for both. She convinces herself her heart was only slightly touched.
It shows maybe her feelings weren't that deep, but it also shows Wickham's true colors, doesn't it? He's purely mercenary.
Absolutely. And Elizabeth, perhaps surprisingly, seems to accept the economic reality driving him. She recognizes the pressure, even if she doesn't admire the action. She judges it highly prudent, a significant shift from her condemnation of Charlotte.
Soon after, Elizabeth travels to Kent to visit the newly married Charlotte Collins at Hunsford Parsonage. Chapter 27.
And Mr. Collins is in his element. Chapter 28 is all about his pride of ownership, showing off his humble abode, pointing out every feature, making sure Elizabeth sees exactly what she turned down.
Constantly talking about his garden, the shelves in the closet.
But Elizabeth credits the neatness and consistency entirely to Charlotte's good management. And she notes how Charlotte has developed coping mechanisms she wisely did not hear many of her husband's more embarrassing remarks.
Charlotte hasn't changed him. She's learned to manage around him, creating pockets of peace in her pragmatic arrangement.
And Hunsford is right next door to Rosings Park, the grand estate of Collins's patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. They dine there frequently.
Before they even meet Lady Catherine, though, they get a glimpse of her daughter, Anne de Bourgh, arriving in her little carriage.
Maria Lucas is shocked at how thin and small she looks. Unimpressive.
But Elizabeth has a very different thought, connecting Miss de Bourgh instantly to the man everyone assumes she's destined to marry, Darcy.
Yes, Elizabeth thinks she looks sickly and cross. Yes, she will do for him very well. She will make him a very proper wife. It's pure cynicism, linking Anne's apparent lack of charm to Darcy's presumed arrogance, a fitting match in her prejudiced view.
Then comes the infamous dinner at Rosings in Chapter 29. Collins is practically exploding with self-importance at the invitation.
He even gives Elizabeth fashion advice beforehand. Wear your best dress, but don't worry too much because Lady Catherine likes to have the distinction of rank preserved. Basically, don't dare look as grand as her ladyship.
Underline your own inferiority, please.
Exactly. And Lady Catherine herself is, well, she's something else. Austen describes her delivering opinions in so decisive a manner as proof that she was not used to have her judgment controverted, utterly domineering.
She immediately starts dictating to Charlotte about how to run her house, manage her cows, her poultry. Nothing is beneath this great lady's attention. Her arrogance isn't reserved like Darcy's. It's loud, invasive, and controlling.
And she turns this interrogative style onto Elizabeth, grills her with incredibly nosy, impertinent questions.
How many sisters? Are they handsome? Are they out? What carriage does your father keep? What was your mother's maiden name? It's a social status check designed to put Elizabeth in her place.
The moment that really shocks Lady Catherine is finding out all 5 Bennet sisters are out in society at the same time, especially Lydia, who's only 15 or 16.
Oh, what, all 5 out at once? Very odd. This was a breach of decorum. Younger sisters usually waited until the older ones were married off so they didn't provide competition.
But Elizabeth pushes back, defends her younger sister's right to enjoy society, says it would be very hard on them to wait. And when Lady Catherine demands to know her age, Elizabeth refuses.
With a smile. Says something like, with 3 younger sisters already grown up, your ladyship can hardly expect me to own it. Polite defiance.
Austen notes Elizabeth suspects she might be the first creature who had ever dared to trifle with so much dignified impertinence. She's standing up to rank and arrogance, using only her wit and composure, and totally unnerving Lady Catherine in the process.
And you have to think, this display of courage, of refusing to be intimidated by mere status, Darcy will hear about this. It's another piece of evidence showing her strength of character. #tag8. Darcy's arrival and the confessional letter, chapters 30 to 34.
The stage is definitely set for a confrontation, because guess who arrives at Rosings in chapter 30?
Mr. Darcy himself, along with his cousin, Colonel Fitzwilliam.
Colonel Fitzwilliam is important too. Charming, amiable, younger son of an earl, so he needs to marry for money, unlike Darcy. Collins, of course, practically runs home to announce the grand arrival. His deference is just endless.
Chapter 31 gives us another classic scene at Rosings, with Elizabeth encountering Darcy again in Lady Catherine's orbit.
The Lady Catherine is still running the show, instructing Darcy to tell his sister Georgiana to practice the piano more, reminding Elizabeth she told her to practice more. Constant critique.
Elizabeth, perhaps emboldened by her previous encounter, decides to playfully bait Darcy, accuses him of coming over just to observe her and frighten me.
Darcy plays along, to a degree. He suggests she enjoys professing opinions which in fact are not your own. He's acknowledging her wit, but also maybe suggesting he sees through some of her defenses.
Then Darcy makes that interesting admission. I cannot boast of knowing how to please a stranger. Acknowledging his social awkwardness.
Which Colonel Fitzwilliam immediately undercuts, says it's not inability, it's lack of effort. It is because he will not give himself the trouble.
And Elizabeth cleverly turns this back on her own piano, playing she could be good, but she doesn't take the trouble of practicing. It's another moment of connection, recognizing a shared trait, perhaps a certain willful reserve.
Darcy seems to be seeing her more clearly now, not just as an antagonist, but as a complex individual. But then comes the bombshell in Chapter 33.
This is huge. Elizabeth is chatting easily with the pleasant Colonel Fitzwilliam, learns he and Darcy are joint guardians of Georgiana Darcy.
And Fitzwilliam, perhaps a bit indiscreetly, maybe trying to explain Darcy's character, casually mentions that Darcy recently performed a great service for a friend. He saved a friend from the inconveniences of a most imprudent marriage.
Uh-oh.
Elizabeth connects the dots instantly. The friend is Bingley. The imprudent marriage was to her sister Jane. Darcy wasn't just complicit. He was the prime mover, the overpowering friend who broke them up.
All her simmering resentment boils over. It's not just prejudice anymore, it's righteous anger. He deliberately ruined her sister's happiness. She feels completely justified now in detesting him.
Which sets the stage perfectly for the confrontation she didn't know was coming. The very next day, Chapter 34. Darcy visits the parsonage alone. Elizabeth is surprised.
And he just comes out with it, the proposal. But it's prefaced with struggle. In vain I have struggled. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you.
Passionate words. But then he immediately ruins it.
Completely. He cannot help himself. He goes on about the inferiority of her connections, the degradation it represents for him, the family obstacles he's had to overcome. He basically insults her and her entire family while proposing marriage.
It's astonishingly arrogant. He's admitting his love, yes, but framing it as a triumph over his own better judgment and social standing. It's like he expects her to be grateful he could overcome his disgust.
Elizabeth's reaction is volcanic. Pure fury. She rejects him instantly and doesn't hold back on her reasons.
Two main pillars for her immovable dislike. First is deliberate destruction of Jane's happiness with Bingley. She calls his actions disgraceful.
Second, his cruel treatment of Wickham, ruining his prospects, casting him into poverty. She calls him unjust and ungenerous. She's attacking his character, his morality, not just his pride.
Darcy is visibly shaken, angry, but tries to maintain composure, and he confirms part of her accusation. He admits coldly that he did deliberately separate Bingley and Jane. Towards him, I have been kinder than towards myself. He still believes he was right to do it, citing the family's impropriety.
He then turns it back on her, accuses her pride of being wounded because he wasn't flattering enough, because he honestly confessed his reservations about her family, calls his concerns natural and just.
The gap between them seems unbridgeable, which leads to Elizabeth delivering that final devastating line. I had not known you a month before I felt that you were the last man in the world whom I could ever be prevailed on to marry.
Oof, that lands. The proposal is an utter disaster. Elizabeth is emotionally wrecked afterwards, cries for half an hour, amazed he even proposed, but absolutely certain she did the right thing.
But it's not over. The next morning, Darcy finds her walking and hands her a letter. This letter changes everything.
It's his explanation, his defense. The moment the novel pivots from first impressions to something much deeper.
He addresses both her accusations directly. Regarding Jane and Bingley, he explains his reasoning. He did observe Jane closely at the Netherfield ball, but her natural reserve, her composure, he interpreted it as indifference, a lack of real affection for Bingley.
He didn't see delicate restraint, he saw a lack of deep feeling, coupled with the family's embarrassing behavior.
He felt justified in intervening to protect his friend from a potentially loveless match with unsuitable connections. He admits concealing Jane's presence in London later was maybe beneath him, but claims it was done for Bingley's good.
Okay, maybe understandable from his perspective, if wrong, but then comes the Wickham part.
This is the real shocker for Elizabeth. Darcy lays out the truth about Wickham. Yes, his father provided for Wickham, educated him, but the church living. Wickham himself declined it when the time came, said he wanted to study law instead.
So Darcy gave him £1,000, a significant sum, specifically instead of the living, to support his law studies.
Which Wickham promptly gambled away or spent frivolously. Then he came back asking for the church living again, which Darcy refused, having already paid him off. That's the source of Wickham's grievance.
Wow. So Wickham lied about the whole thing, but Darcy reveals something even worse, doesn't he?
Yes. The truly damning part. Wickham later targeted Darcy's own sister, Georgiana. She was only 15. He charmed her, convinced her to elope with him.
Why?
Her fortune. She had an inheritance of £30,000. Wickham wasn't interested in Georgiana. He was after her money. Darcy discovered the plan just in time and stopped it, exposing Wickham's utter lack of principle.
This letter completely demolishes Elizabeth's worldview, her judgment, her prejudice.
everything. She realizes Wickham's charm was pure manipulation. Darcy's reserve wasn't malice, but perhaps justified caution and pain from past betrayals. She feels overwhelming shame and mortification.
She realizes she was the proud one, trusting her first impressions and her own cleverness over evidence. She admits to herself she had been blind, partial, prejudiced, absurd. This is the absolute turning point for her character, the beginning of genuine self-awareness. #TagIX. The fallout of scandal, chapters 39 to 47. So Elizabeth travels home from Kent, still processing Darcy's letter, this huge shift in her understanding, chapter 39. And the journey itself provides more food for thought, particularly about her younger sisters.
Yes, Lydia and Kitty meet her partway, and Lydia is just. Loud, boisterous, bragging about a prank where they dressed up an Officer Chamberlain in women's clothes. Only think what fun, she says, utterly lacking in self-awareness or decorum.
And Elizabeth has this moment of painful self-reflection. She connects Lydia's coarse behavior, her shallow focus on flirting and fun,
to her own recent, albeit less extreme, attraction to Wickham. She recognizes a similar coarseness of the sentiment, even in Wickham's mercenary pursuit of Miss King. She starts to see the roots of Lydia's recklessness in the family's overall lack of guidance, her father's negligence, her mother's silliness.
This unease comes to a head in chapter 41 with the Brighton scheme.
Ah, Brighton. The seaside town where the militia regiment is being relocated for the summer. Lydia gets invited to go along by Mrs. Forster, the wife of the colonel, a young, newly married woman herself, perhaps not the most responsible chaperone.
Elizabeth, now armed with her new understanding of Wickham, who will be there, and a clearer view of Lydia's recklessness, sees the danger immediately. She pleads with her father to forbid Lydia from going.
She warns him about Lydia's unguarded and imprudent manner, the potential for disgrace that could affect the whole family, especially the older sister's marriage prospects.
It's a mature, reasoned argument, but Mr. Bennet...
He dismisses her concerns, utterly fatalistic, says they'll have no peace at Longbourn if Lydia does not go, thinks she's too silly and too poor to be an object of prey to anybody, concludes she cannot grow many degrees worse than she already is.
It's staggering negligence. His desire for peace and quiet overrides his parental responsibility. He lets Lydia go to Brighton, essentially sealing the family's fate.
So Lydia goes off to Brighton. Elizabeth goes on a trip north with her sensible aunt and Uncle Gardner. And this trip leads them, unexpectedly, to Pemberley, Darcy's estate. Chapter 43.
Elizabeth only agrees to go because she's assured Darcy is away. She's curious, maybe, but also wary.
But the place itself starts to work on her immediately. She's expecting ostentation, maybe like Rosings, but Pemberley is different. It has less of splendor and more real elegance. It reflects taste, restraint, natural beauty integrated with the house. It speaks of a different kind of character.
And she has that fleeting thought. And of this place, she thought, I might have been mistress.
But she quickly pushes it away, reminding herself of the social barriers, thinking she should not have been allowed to invite her Gardner relatives because of their trade connections. She still assumes Darcy's pride would have been an obstacle.
Then comes the encounter with Mrs. Reynolds, the housekeeper. And this is another huge piece of the puzzle falling into place.
Mrs. Reynolds gives Darcy a glowing review, unsolicited, calls him the best landlord and the best master. Kind to the servants, generous to the poor, adored since childhood, says she's never known a cross word from him in my life.
This directly contradicts Elizabeth's firmest opinion of him as ill-tempered and arrogant. She's hearing about a private Darcy, a respected Darcy that she never knew existed. It forces her to reconsider everything again.
And just as she's absorbing this, guess who shows up?
Darcy himself. He arrives home a day earlier than expected. It's incredibly awkward.
But his reaction is transformative. He's clearly surprised, maybe even suspects she came deliberately. But instead of coldness or pride, his behavior is strikingly altered. He's polite, civil, asks after her family with genuine concern. It's a total contrast to Rosings. He seems to be making a huge effort to overcome his natural reserves.
The next day, chapter 44, he does something even more surprising. He brings his sister, Georgiana, to meet Elizabeth at her inn.
Georgiana is painfully shy, but clearly eager to please Elizabeth, having heard so much about her from her brother. And Darcy himself, he's almost unrecognizable.
Austen describes him as so desirous to please, so free from self-consequence or unbending reserve. And crucially, he extends this civility to the Gardners. Her trade relations, he treats them with respect, takes Mr. Gardner fishing. This is massive proof of change.
And Bingley shows up too. He's visiting Darcy. And his conversation with Elizabeth confirms he still carries a torch for Jane. He remembers the exact date of the Netherfield ball, the 26th of November, the last time he saw her. asks pointedly if all her sisters were at Longbourn.
Elizabeth reads it clearly. A recollection of Jane not untinctured by tenderness. Darcy's influence over Bingley seems to be weakening. Or maybe Darcy is no longer actively discouraging him.
The whole atmosphere is shifting towards reconciliation, until Miss Bingley tries to sabotage it.
Always Caroline. She makes a pointed remark to Elizabeth about the Shire militia having left Meryton, trying to remind everyone of Elizabeth's connection to the officers, especially Wickham, a sly attempt to wound her.
But it backfires. The mention of Wickham clearly distresses Georgiana Darcy, reminding everyone why Darcy despises Wickham. It exposes Miss Bingley's malice and reinforces Darcy's protective nature.
Elizabeth sees all this. Darcy's changed demeanor, his kindness to her relatives, his attentiveness. She starts to piece it together. It can't just be politeness. It must be ardent love, as he claimed.
She finds herself feeling respected, esteemed, grateful. The foundations for affection are being laid, built on respect and observation of his true character, not just a charming first impression.
But just as things seem hopeful, disaster strikes. Chapter 46. Elizabeth receives 2 frantic letters from Jane.
Lydia has run away from Brighton, eloped with Wickham.
And Colonel Forster, who investigated, doubts Wickham has any intention of actually marrying her. They've disappeared, possibly heading to London.
It's the ultimate disgrace. Dreadful disaster. Utter destruction of reputation and comfort, Elizabeth thinks. The family's worst fears realized thanks to Lydia's recklessness and Wickham's lack of principle.
And who should walk in right at that moment as Elizabeth is reading the devastating news?
Darcy. He sees her extreme distress immediately, and his reaction is telling. No judgment, no I told you so, just immediate gentleness and commiseration, concern.
He listens quietly as she blurts out the story, blaming herself for not exposing Wickham earlier. When he hears Wickham's name, his reaction is serious, thoughtful. He quickly takes his leave, respecting her need for privacy, but clearly affected by the news and her pain.
On the journey home, chapter 47, Elizabeth confesses her guilt to her aunt, admits she knew Wickham was false and deceitful after reading Darcy's letter, but kept quiet, didn't warn anyone, didn't foresee this specific danger. She blames herself, her father, her mother, the whole family's collective failure. The scandal is now terrifyingly real. #TagX. Resolution and final attachments, chapters 49 to 61.
The Bennets are in turmoil. Mr. Bennet goes to London to search for Lydia. Mr. Gardiner joins him. Weeks pass with no news. Then, chapter 49, a letter arrives from Mr. Gardiner.
With astonishing news. Lydia and Wickham have been found, and they are to be married. Relief washes over the family.
But the terms, they're humiliating. Wickham has agreed to marry Lydia, but only on condition that his debts are paid off and he receives a settlement, an annual income.
Mr. Bennet reveals the figures. Wickham gets £100 a year for life. Lydia gets £50 a year if she outlives him. Plus, all his outstanding debts, gambling debts, debts to tradesmen have been cleared. Mr. Bennet calculates this must have cost someone thousands of pounds, maybe £10,000, far more than he could ever afford.
He assumes his generous brother-in-law, Mr. Gardiner, must have paid it all out of his own pocket to save the family's honor. Elizabeth suspects the same, feeling immense gratitude towards her uncle.
Mrs. Bennet's reaction, meanwhile, is, well, typical Mrs. Bennet. She swings from despair to ecstatic joy. Mrs. Wickham, how well it sounds. She's instantly planning wedding clothes, completely ignoring the disgrace, the financial burden, the shotgun nature of it all.
She even implies Mr. Gardiner owed them the money. Her lack of awareness is just staggering, still focused entirely on the surface, getting a daughter married.
But the real story behind the rescue comes out in chapter 52. Elizabeth receives a private letter from her Aunt Gardiner, explaining what actually happened in London.
And the hero wasn't Mr. Gardiner, it was Darcy.
Darcy. He secretly went to London himself as soon as he heard the news from Elizabeth at Lambton. Why? He felt responsible. He told Mrs. Gardiner he believed Wickham's worthlessness had not been so well known, because he had kept Wickham's past misdeeds, especially the Georgiana affair, quiet out of mistaken pride. He felt his silence had enabled Wickham to deceive Lydia.
So he felt a moral obligation to fix the mess he felt he'd partly caused.
Exactly. He tracked down Lydia and Wickham, found them living together, unmarried. Apparently Lydia was absolutely resolved on remaining where she was. Wickham probably had no intention of marrying her until Darcy intervened.
Darcy then negotiated with Wickham, paid off all his substantial debts, bribed Mrs. Young, Georgiana's disgraced former governess who had helped Wickham find Lydia, to ensure secrecy, purchased Wickham a new commission in the army far away in the north, and settled an annuity on Lydia, all out of his own pocket.
An incredible act of generosity and responsibility. costing him a fortune. And he did it all secretly, wanting no credit, asking only that the gardeners take the public acclaim. He did it for a girl he couldn't regard nor esteem.
Elizabeth is overwhelmed. Her heart did whisper that he had done it for her. Gratitude, respect, esteem, they blossom into something much stronger. This act of selfless nobility, stemming from his feelings for her, forms the true foundation for her love. His pride has been completely transformed into honorable action.
Lydia and Wickham then visit Longbourn before heading north, chapter 51. And Lydia is completely unchanged, wild, noisy, and fearless, bragging about her marriage, totally oblivious to the near disaster.
But she lets slip one crucial detail. Talking about the wedding, she mentions that if Uncle Gardner hadn't been there, Mr. Darcy might have done as well, basically admitting Darcy was present.
Oops. Elizabeth catches it immediately. It confirms her aunt's letter. Jane likely overhears too, but is too delicate to press the point. The truth is out, at least between the sisters.
Okay, so Darcy has proven his worth through action. Bingley returns to Netherfield, proposes to Jane, presumably with Darcy's blessing now, one happy ending secured. But what about Elizabeth and Darcy?
The final barrier, ironically, is Lady Catherine de Bourgh, chapter 56. She gets wind of a rumor that her nephew Darcy is engaged to Elizabeth Bennet, and she is not having it.
She descends upon Longbourn like a force of nature, demands to speak to Elizabeth alone.
And the confrontation is epic. Lady Catherine is furious, insists Elizabeth deny the rumor, reminds her Darcy is destined for her own daughter, and an arrangement planned while in their cradles.
She insults Elizabeth's family, her connections, calls them a disgrace, says their name will never even be mentioned by any of us if this match happens. Pure aristocratic snobbery and entitlement.
But Elizabeth refuses to be cowed, stands her ground magnificently, refuses to make any promises about not marrying Darcy, defends her own status. He is a gentleman. I am a gentleman's daughter. So far, we are equal.
It's an assertion of personal worth over inherited rank. Crucially, though, while defending her right to marry him, she honestly tells Lady Catherine, I am not engaged to him currently, but follows up with, I will make no promise of the kind for the future.
And this refusal to promise, this continued defiance, is exactly what Darcy needed to hear, as he reveals later in chapter 58 when he returns to Longbourn and walks with Elizabeth.
He explains that Lady Catherine, in her fury, went straight to him afterwards and reported Elizabeth's stubborn refusal, and Darcy realized
that if Elizabeth had been irrevocably decided against me, her inherent honesty would have made her tell Lady Catherine so directly. Her refusal to promise gave him hope. Her very defiance, the quality he admired, signaled that the door might still be open.
So he proposes again. Or rather, they finally talk openly. Elizabeth tries to thank him for rescuing Lydia.
He tries to stop her, but she insists. And then she confesses that her feelings have undergone so material a change since his first proposal, that she now receives his assurances of continued love with gratitude and pleasure.
It's the second successful engagement, built on mutual understanding, respect, and acknowledged growth on both sides. Darcy admits the first proposal was arrogant, acknowledges his faults regarding Jane and Bingley, expressing shame for his interference.
It's a complete reversal. Both have shed their initial pride and prejudice.
The very last hurdle is Mr. Bennet, chapter 59. Elizabeth has to tell her father she's engaged to the man he thought was a proud, unpleasant sort of man. He's utterly astonished.
He questions her seriously. Are you out of your senses to be accepting this man? Have you not always hated him?
Elizabeth has to passionately defend Darcy, assure her father, I love him. Indeed, he has no improper pride. He is perfectly amiable. But Mr. Bennet needs more proof.
So Elizabeth tells him the final secret piece. Darcy was the one who saved Lydia, paid off Wickham, sacrifices money and time for their family.
Mr. Bennet is floored. This is an evening of wonders indeed. And so Darcy did everything. He deserves you. It's the ultimate validation. Even the cynical Mr. Bennet recognizes Darcy's true worth, demonstrated through action. His detachment is finally broken by genuine admiration.
And so the novel wraps up in chapter 61 with the two happy marriages, Jane and Bingley, Elizabeth and Darcy. Mrs. Bennet achieves her life's goal, though she remains occasionally nervous and invariably silly. Her character arc is flat.
She delights in visiting Mrs. Bingley and talking about Mrs. Darcy.
Lady Catherine sends an abusive letter, but eventually reconciles, unable to resist the connection to Pemberley. Showing perhaps Elizabeth's positive influence in bridging even those divides, Elizabeth learns to handle difficult relations with grace, something Darcy's pride previously prevented. #tag SIOAY. Outro and final thought.
Wow, what a journey indeed. From those disastrous first impressions at the Meryton Ball to, well, multiple happy endings, achieved through so much turmoil and self-discovery.
It really underscores that the novel, while deeply romantic, is about so much more. It's fundamentally about the necessity of critical self-reflection.
Right. Elizabeth has to confront her prejudice, her tendency to judge based on superficial charm, like Wickham's, and her pride in her own supposedly infallible judgment.
And Darcy has to confront his pride, his ingrained class snobbery, his arrogance and learned humility through his feelings for Elizabeth, culminating in that incredibly noble, selfless act for Lydia.
The novel acknowledges the harsh realities, too. External pressures, the entailment, social status, lack of fortune make prudence necessary. We see that starkly with Charlotte Lucas. Her choice makes grim economic sense.
But true happiness, Austen suggests, requires more than just prudence. It requires self-knowledge, the willingness to change, to admit fault, and to value character over connections or charm. Darcy's wealth provides the security, yes, but it's Elizabeth's influence and their mutual growth that promise real happiness.
So what's the takeaway for us reading this today? What can you learn from this deep dive?
Well, I think it's a masterclass in observing motivation. Question the narratives you're given. Who speaks smoothly and agreeably, like Wickham, and who demonstrates their worth through difficult, costly actions, like Darcy eventually does?
Yeah, look past the surface.
Oh, yeah.
Assess people based on their actions and their willingness to grow, not just their manners or their initial presentation. Sometimes the person who insults you at a party might be the one who steps up when things get really tough.
Okay, so here's our final provocative thought for you to mull over. We've talked about Elizabeth and Darcy's individual growth being key to their happiness. But how much did their happy ending actually depend on Lydia's disgrace?
That's interesting.
Think about it. Would Darcy have had the opportunity to perform that ultimate redeeming act, saving the family's reputation, proving his love and changed character beyond doubt if Lydia hadn't created the scandal in the first place? Could their specific path to mutual understanding have even happened without that crisis forcing Darcy's hand?
So can profound personal and romantic triumph actually be triggered, even necessitated, by tragedy and disgrace?
Something to consider. Can disaster be the unlikely catalyst for the deepest forms of connection and redemption?
We'll leave you chewing on that one. Thank you for joining us on the deep dive.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive into the archives.